At 3:30 p.m. on the 28th of April 2008, a tornado touched down in the city of Suffolk, Virginia. It was a Monday afternoon. The skies had been darkening for hours, but in the coastal plains of southeastern Virginia, spring storms are routine. People had gone to work that morning under partly cloudy skies. By midday, the National Weather Service had issued a tornado watch for the region. Watches are common in April. Most people did not change their plans. At 1:45 p.m., the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had highlighted an area from central North Carolina into southern Virginia as having a moderate risk for severe weather. The parameters were textbook: warm, moist air from the Gulf of America meeting a strong upper-level disturbance moving east from the Mississippi Valley. Wind shear was high. Instability was high. The ingredients for a tornado outbreak were in place. At 2:30 p.m., a supercell thunderstorm developed over northeastern North Carolina, near the border with Virginia. It moved northeast at around 40 miles per hour. The storm was intense. It had a well-defined mesocyclone, which is the rotating updraft that often produces tornadoes. Radar operators at the National Weather Service office in Wakefield, Virginia, began tracking it closely. At 3:10 p.m., the storm crossed into Virginia near the city of Suffolk. Suffolk is one of the largest cities in the state by land area, but much of it is rural with farmland, swamps, and scattered subdivisions. The storm was moving toward the more populated parts of the city. At 3:20 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for the city of Suffolk and surrounding areas. The warning stated that a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado had been detected by radar. It urged residents to take cover immediately. The warning reached local television stations, which began broadcasting crawl messages and live cut-ins. Emergency sirens were activated in some parts of the city, but not everyone heard them. Some sirens had been damaged in previous storms and had not been repaired. Others were inaudible over the sound of wind and rain. At 3:27 p.m., a spotter reported seeing a funnel cloud near the intersection of Route 58 and Route 460 just west of downtown Suffolk. The spotter was a trained volunteer with the Skywarn program, a network of citizens who relay real-time weather observations to the National Weather Service. He described the funnel as broad and rotating slowly. He estimated it was about 2 miles away from his position. At 3:30 p.m., the tornado touched down on the ground. The touchdown point was near the community of Driver, a small unincorporated area in Suffolk. The tornado was at least a quarter of a mile wide at this point. It was moving northeast at about 35 miles per hour. The first structures to be hit were a cluster of single-family homes on the outskirts of Driver. The tornado removed roofs, collapsed exterior walls, and snapped trees at the trunk. Witnesses described a sound like a freight train mixed with a low rumble, then a sudden pressure change that made ears pop. Several residents who had taken shelter in basements or interior bathrooms survived. Those who had stayed on upper floors or in mobile homes did not. At 3:33 p.m., the tornado crossed Nansemond Parkway, a major road in the city. It struck a shopping center that included a grocery store, a pharmacy, and several small businesses. The grocery store had been open at the time. Customers and employees took cover in the back of the store near the walk-in coolers. The tornado ripped off the front facade of the building and collapsed the roof over the produce section. 2 people inside were injured by flying debris. No one died inside the store, but the damage was severe. At 3:35 p.m., the tornado entered a residential neighborhood called Lake Kilby. This was a densely built area with older homes, many of them built before modern building codes. The tornado flattened entire blocks. Houses that had been standing for decades were reduced to piles of splintered wood and twisted metal. Cars were thrown into living rooms. Trees were uprooted and tossed onto roofs. The debris field was so dense that emergency responders could not drive into the neighborhood for the first 30 minutes. They had to proceed on foot. At 3:37 p.m., the tornado struck a middle school. School building was largely empty because classes had ended for the day, but there were still staff members and students involved in after-school activities. The tornado tore off a section of the roof and collapsed a gymnasium wall. Some students and teachers took shelter in a hallway as the windows blew out. The school's alarm system activated, but it was unclear whether it was triggered by the impact or by power fluctuations. No one was killed at the school, but several people suffered minor injuries. At 3:40 p.m., the tornado crossed the downtown area of Suffolk. Downtown Suffolk is a historic district with brick buildings dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries. The tornado damaged or destroyed several of these buildings. The City Hall building lost its roof. The old courthouse had its front windows blown out. A church built in 1850 lost its steeple. The tornado was at its maximum intensity here, with winds estimated at between 135 and 155 miles per hour, equivalent to an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale. At 3:42 p.m., the tornado exited downtown and moved into the northeastern part of the city, which was less densely populated. It continued through farmland and wooded areas, weakening slowly. By 3:48 p.m., it had lifted off the ground near the border of Suffolk and the city of Chesapeake. The total path length was approximately 15 miles. The maximum width was 800 yards. When the tornado lifted, the damage was already being assessed. Initial reports were chaotic. Power lines were down across the city. Cell towers had been damaged, making communication difficult. Roads were blocked by debris. Emergency responders from Suffolk, Chesapeake, and the surrounding counties began converging on the affected areas. The Red Cross opened shelters. The National Guard was placed on standby. What happened in Suffolk that afternoon was not a surprise to meteorologists. The conditions had been forecast days in advance. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk outlook the night before. The National Weather Service had issued warnings well in advance of the tornado. But warnings alone do not protect people. Protection requires that warnings are received, understood, and acted upon. In Suffolk, some people did not receive the warnings in time. Others received them but did not believe they applied to their location. Some heard the sirens but did not recognize them as tornado sirens. The city had used the same sirens for fire calls, weather emergencies, and other civil defense purposes, and many residents had become conditioned to ignore them. The tornado killed 2 people. One was an elderly woman in the Lake Kilby neighborhood who was trapped in her home when it collapsed around her. The other was a man in his 50s who was driving home from work and was caught in the open when the tornado crossed the road he was on. His vehicle was thrown into a field and rolled several times. He died at the scene. A total of 67 people were injured, some critically. The storm also destroyed or damaged more than 200 homes and dozens of businesses. The total property damage was estimated at $30 million. For a city the size of Suffolk, which had a population of about 80,000 at the time, the impact was deep. The tornado did not just damage buildings. It disrupted the community in ways that were not immediately measurable. Schools were closed for a week. Businesses that had been in operation for years never reopened. Some families moved away permanently. Investigators from the National Weather Service arrived the next morning. They conducted a damage survey that took 3 days. They mapped the path, measured debris patterns, and interviewed witnesses. They classified the tornado as an EF3 with peak winds at 150 miles per hour. They also noted that the tornado had produced a damage pattern consistent with multiple vortices, meaning that within the main funnel there were smaller, more intense subvortices that caused localized areas of extreme destruction. What the investigators found was not just a weather event. It was a case study in how a community responds when the most predictable part of a disaster is the storm itself. The tornado was forecast. The warnings were issued. But the systems that connected the forecast to the people, the sirens, the media, the emergency alert system, the individual decision-making of each resident, all of those systems had gaps. And those gaps were what determined the outcome. The question that emerged in the aftermath was not whether the warnings were good enough. They were by most measures adequate. The question was whether the public was prepared to receive them. In Suffolk, as in many communities across the United States, there had been no major tornado in decades. The last significant tornado to hit the city had been in 1999, and it was much weaker. People had grown complacent. They had stopped paying attention to warnings. They assumed that tornadoes did not happen in coastal Virginia, or that if they did, they would hit somewhere else. That complacency was reinforced by the geography of the region. Suffolk is not in Tornado Alley. It is in the Mid-Atlantic, where tornadoes are less frequent and often weaker. But the 2008 outbreak showed that the Mid-Atlantic is not immune to violent tornadoes. The same storm system that produced the Suffolk tornado also produced tornadoes in North Carolina and elsewhere in Virginia. One of those tornadoes, an EF2, hit the town of Waverly, about 30 miles west of Suffolk, causing additional damage and injuries. The storm system that day was part of a larger pattern. The upper-level disturbance, the moisture from the Gulf, the wind shear, all of those factors were in place. But the specific conditions that allowed the Suffolk tornado to reach EF3 strength were narrow. The storm had to maintain its rotation as it moved over land. The downdraft had to be balanced with the updraft. The mesocyclone had to tighten. All of those things happened in sequence. And when they did, the result was a tornado that caught a city off guard. The aftermath of the Suffolk tornado brought changes. The city upgraded its siren system and standardized the signals. The National Weather Service improved its collaboration with local emergency managers. Public awareness campaigns were launched to remind residents that tornadoes can happen anywhere, at any time, and that warnings should always be taken seriously. But the deeper lesson of the Suffolk tornado is that no matter how good the forecast is, no matter how fast the warnings are sent, the final step of protection is always the individual. And the individual cannot be forecast. At 2 p.m. on April 28, 2008, the Storm Prediction Center issued a tornado watch for southeastern Virginia, effective until 9 o'clock that evening. The watch covered a broad area including Suffolk, Chesapeake, Norfolk, and parts of northeastern North Carolina. The phrase in the watch text was specific: Conditions are favorable for the development of severe thunderstorms capable of producing tornadoes. It was the second such watch issued that day for the region. The first, issued at 10:30 a.m., had expired without a single tornado report. Meteorologists knew the afternoon would be different. The environment that afternoon was textbook for tornado development in the mid-Atlantic. Surface dew points had climbed into the mid-60s, pushing the moisture content to levels more common in the deep south. The wind shear profile was extreme for the region. At the surface, winds blew from the southeast at 15 miles per hour. At 5,000 feet, they shifted to the south-southwest at 40 miles per hour. At 20,000 feet, they turned to the west-southwest at 70 miles per hour. This directional and speed shear created a deep layer of rotation in the atmosphere. The instability was also high. The convective available potential energy, or CAPE, was measured at over 2,000 joules per kilogram. That is enough energy to fuel a violent updraft. The supercell that produced the Suffolk tornado began developing around 2:30 p.m. over northeastern North Carolina, near the town of Murfreesboro. It moved northeast at about 35 miles per hour. At 2:45 p.m., the National Weather Service office in Wakefield, Virginia, issued a severe thunderstorm warning for the storm. The warning noted that the storm had a history of producing large hail and damaging winds. Radar showed a bounded weak echo region, a sign of a strong rotating updraft. At 3 p.m., the storm crossed the Virginia line near the city of Franklin. At that point, the rotation in the storm's mesocyclone tightened noticeably. The storm was organizing into a classic supercell. At 3:05 p.m., the Wakefield office issued a tornado warning for the storm. The warning covered parts of Southampton County and the city of Suffolk. The lead time was approximately 20 minutes. That is a respectable warning time by any standard. The National Weather Service activated the emergency alert system. Local television stations broke into programming. Sirens in Suffolk were sounded. The warning said, "Take cover immediately. This is a dangerous storm." But the warning did not reach everyone. In the Lake Kilby neighborhood, several residents later told investigators that they did not hear the sirens. The sirens in that part of the city were old, and their coverage area had gaps. Some residents said they heard a siren but thought it was a fire call. Others said they heard nothing over the sound of the wind. One resident, a retired firefighter, said he heard the siren but dismissed it because the sirens in Suffolk had been activated so many times for false alarms that he no longer took them seriously. That conditioned behavior is called alert fatigue. It is a documented problem in emergency management. When warnings are issued too often for storms that do not materialize, people stop responding. At 3:07 p.m., the tornado touched down in the woods west of Lake Kilby. The first structure it struck was a small storage shed. The shed was obliterated. The owner, who was inside his house nearby, said he heard a sound like a freight train and dove into his bathroom. That house lost its roof but did not collapse. The tornado then crossed the lake. The water level in the lake dropped as the tornado vacuumed water upward. Witnesses reported seeing a dark column of spray rising into the base of the funnel. One fisherman on the lake barely made it to shore before the storm hit. He later described the sound as a roar like a jet engine. The tornado moved into the Lake Kilby residential area at 3:10 p.m. It was at this point that the first fatality occurred. The elderly woman who died lived in a one-story ranch house at the end of a cul-de-sac. She was 82 years old. Her daughter, who lived across town, had called her when the tornado warning was issued. The daughter told investigators that her mother said she was in the hallway, which was her designated shelter spot. The hallway had no windows. But the house was not anchored to its foundation. It had been built in the 1960s before modern building codes required anchor bolts for wind resistance. The tornado lifted the house off its foundation and rolled it. The hallway collapsed. The woman was found in the debris. She had died of blunt force trauma. She was the only person in the house. No one else was home. The tornado continued northeast. At 3:20 p.m., it crossed the main road connecting Lake Kilby to downtown Route 6 Fertwo. A man driving a pickup truck was heading south on that road when the tornado crossed in front of him. He later told reporters that he saw the tornado and tried to turn around. But the road was narrow and the tornado was moving faster than he could accelerate. The truck was lifted off the ground and thrown into a field. He survived with a broken arm and a concussion. He was one of the lucky ones. The second fatality occurred about 2 minutes later. A man in his mid-50s was driving home from his job at a warehouse southwest of the city. He was on a different road, Route 604, when the tornado crossed it. He did not have time to stop. His car was thrown into a ditch and rolled. He died at the scene from massive internal injuries. His wife had called him when she heard the warning. He told her he was almost home. He was 2 miles away. The tornado then entered the Lake Calhoun neighborhood. This was a newer development built in the 1990s. Many of the houses were constructed with modern building codes, including anchor bolts and hurricane clips. The damage here was severe but not total. Some houses lost roofs and exterior walls, but the main structures held. One family of 4 survived by huddling in an interior closet with a mattress over them. The father later said they had taken a shelter-in-place training course at work a year earlier. That training saved their lives. At 3:37 p.m., the tornado struck the middle school. The school had a large gymnasium with a metal roof. The roof was peeled back and the walls collapsed inward. Fortunately, the school day had ended. Only a few students were inside for a chess club meeting and a basketball practice. The basketball team was on the court when the lights went out. The coach yelled for everyone to get into the hallway. They made it just as the gym roof came down. A piece of the metal roof flew into the hallway and struck a student in the leg. He suffered a deep laceration but survived. The chess club was in a classroom on the other side of the building. They took shelter under desks. The classroom windows blew out, but the desks provided enough protection. After the middle school, the tornado entered the downtown historic district. The damage there was dramatic because of the age and construction of the buildings. A building from 1820, which had been a law office, lost its entire front facade. The bricks were scattered across the street. The steeple of the 1850 church was found 2 blocks away, embedded in a parked car. The city hall lost its roof and the records stored in the attic were destroyed. Some of those records dated back to the city's founding in the Once-Avenza Zeros. The tornado stopped at a bank building that had been reinforced with concrete in the 198 The bank's vault, which was in the basement, remained intact. The building above suffered moderate damage. The vault was later used as a temporary emergency command center. The tornado lifted at 3:48 p.m. The silence that followed was described by survivors as eerie. The wind stopped. The hail stopped. Birds started chirping again. Then the first sounds of sirens and backup alarms began. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Down power lines sparked fires in several locations. Natural gas leaks were reported in downtown. The water system lost pressure in some areas because of broken mains. Emergency responders had difficulty coordinating because the city's radio repeater, which was mounted on a water tower, had been knocked down. They had to use cell phones and runners for communication. First responders who arrived on scene were confronted with a landscape they did not recognize. Streets were blocked by collapsed trees and building debris. Vehicles were overturned. People were wandering in shock. The triage system was improvised. The most seriously injured were taken to Centara Abasai Hospital in Suffolk, but that hospital had also sustained damage. Its emergency room lost power and switched to backup generators. Some patients were transferred to Chesapeake General Hospital. The total number of injured eventually reached 67. The majority had cuts and bruises. A dozen had broken bones. 3 had critical head injuries. All survived. The Red Cross set up a shelter at the Suffolk Community Center. Within hours, more than 200 people had checked in. Many had lost everything. The shelter provided food, water, and cots. Mental health counselors were brought in. The American Red Cross reported that the number of people seeking psychological first aid was higher than in typical disasters. Survivors spoke of being unable to sleep, of reliving the sound, of feeling that they had done something wrong by not preparing better. The National Weather Service survey team arrived the next morning. They spent 3 days walking the entire 15-mile path. They measured damage to structures and trees. They used GPS to record the location of each damage indicator. They assigned the tornado a rating of EF3 based on the severe structural damage to well-built houses in Lake Cahoon and the destruction of the church steeple. The maximum wind speed was estimated at 150 miles per hour. They also found evidence of multiple vortices, areas where trees were twisted in opposite directions and where debris was deposited in convergent patterns. This was a complex tornado, not a single funnel. The investigation also looked at the warning system. The City of Suffolk's Emergency Management Office conducted an after-action review. They found that the siren system had a coverage gap in the Lake Kilby area. The sirens were placed on utility poles, but the terrain and tree canopy blocked the sound. The system was also used for fire calls, which meant that residents often misinterpreted the tone. The city later installed additional sirens and created a distinct tornado siren tone. They also launched an education campaign to teach residents the difference between a fire siren and a weather siren. The broader question of why so many people ignored the warnings was studied by social scientists. Researchers from the University of Virginia conducted interviews with survivors. They found that many people had a mental model of where tornadoes could occur. Those models did not include Suffolk. People believed tornadoes only happened in the plains. They also found that the long lead time, 20 minutes, actually worked against the warning. Some people used that time to watch the storm approach rather than take shelter. They did not believe it would hit them until it was too late. This is called the normalcy bias. The Suffolk tornado remains one of the most significant tornado events in Virginia history. It was not the deadliest. A tornado in 1998 in Petersburg killed 3 people, but it was the strongest to hit Tidewater, Virginia in decades. It demonstrated that the Mid-Atlantic is vulnerable to violent tornadoes and that vulnerability is not just meteorological. It is structural, social, and psychological. The event led to changes in siren protocols, warning dissemination, and public education. But the core lesson is that warnings are only as effective as the public's willingness to respond. In the years since 2008, Suffolk has recovered. The damaged buildings were rebuilt. The church got a new steeple. The school gym was replaced. The families who lost homes either rebuilt or moved. The economic impact was absorbed, but the memory persists. Every spring, when the sky turns green and the winds gust, residents of Suffolk pay closer attention. They have learned what the meteorologists could not teach them. They have learned that a tornado does not need a reputation to be deadly. It only needs the right conditions, a piece of open ground, and a population that is not quite ready to believe. At 3:12 p.m. on the afternoon of April 28, 2008, the National Weather Service office in Wakefield, Virginia, issued a severe thunderstorm warning for the city of Suffolk. The warning mentioned the possibility of large hail and damaging winds. It did not mention a tornado. 4 minutes later, at 3:16 p.m., a spotter reported a funnel cloud near the intersection of Route 10 and Route 58. That report was relayed to the Wakefield office. The warning was not upgraded. The forecasters had been watching a line of thunderstorms that had formed along a cold front moving eastward across central Virginia. The storms were intense, but the parameters for tornadoes were marginal. The thinking at the time was that the main threat was straight-line winds. That thinking was about to be proven wrong. What happened next was a chain of meteorological events that came together in a way that is still studied today. The tornado that struck Suffolk was not a classic supercell tornado. It formed from a low-topped thunderstorm with a very small mesocyclone. The storm was embedded in a line of heavy precipitation. This type of tornado is often called a quasi-linear convective system tornado or QLCS tornado. They are difficult to detect on radar because the rotation is typically weaker and shorter-lived than a classic supercell tornado. The radar signature that appeared over Suffolk was subtle. A velocity couplet, the sign of rotation, appeared at 3:18 p.m., but it was only 10 knots of shear. That is within the range of normal thunderstorm turbulence. The radar algorithm did not flag it as significant. The storm that produced the tornado had a history. It was part of a larger complex of thunderstorms that had formed earlier that afternoon over southern Virginia. The environment was rich in moisture with dew points in the upper 60s. Instability was modest, but there was strong wind shear in the lower levels of the atmosphere. The wind direction changed from southerly at the surface to westerly aloft. That created a rolling effect in the atmosphere. Meteorologists call it helicity. That day, the helicity was not extreme, but it was enough to support a brief, intense tornado given the right trigger. The trigger was the cold front itself. As the front moved east, it lifted the warm, moist air ahead of it. The lift was focused along a narrow band. That band passed directly over Suffolk. The tornado touched down at 3:33 p.m. It was on the ground for 15 minutes. That is not a long time by tornado standards. But the path it carved was 15 miles long and 400 yards wide. That is an unusually long path for a tornado in Virginia. The average path length for a Virginia tornado is less than 2 miles. The Suffolk tornado was an outlier in almost every way. It moved at an average speed of 50 miles per hour. That is fast. Most tornadoes move at 30 miles per hour. The forward speed meant that the time between the warning and the impact was compressed. The warning was issued at 3:28 p.m. The tornado arrived at the first neighborhood at 3:33 p.m. That gave residents 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not enough time to get everyone into a safe place, especially in neighborhoods with large lots and scattered homes. The National Weather Service later reviewed their performance. They found that the warning was issued 2 minutes before the tornado touched down. The average lead time for a tornado warning in the United States at that time was about 13 minutes. The Suffolk warning was below average. The reason was that the rotation was not detected until the tornado was already forming. The meteorologists on duty that day have said that they were focused on a different part of the storm. They were watching the main line of thunderstorms to the north. The storm over Suffolk was not the one they were paying attention to. It was a secondary cell. That is a common problem in warning operations. The most dangerous storm is often not the one that looks the most impressive on radar. The failure to detect the rotation early has been studied by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Researchers looked at the radar data and found that the velocity couplet was actually present for 6 minutes before the tornado touched down, but it was weak and at a low elevation. The radar beam was scanning at an elevation angle of 1.5 degrees. At the distance of the storm, that beam was about 3,000 feet above the ground. The rotation was located at a lower altitude. The radar missed it. This is a known limitation of the WSR-8D radar network. The beam is conical. The farther from the radar, the higher the beam goes. The Suffolk tornado formed only about 20 miles from the radar in Wakefield, but the beam still overshot the lowest part of the storm. After the tornado lifted, the storm continued moving east. It produced another tornado in the city of Chesapeake about 20 minutes later. That tornado was rated E-phone. It was much weaker, but it still caused damage. The same storm system also produced a tornado in the town of Isle of Wight about 15 miles west of Suffolk. That tornado was unrated because it occurred over open farmland and did not strike any structures. The outbreak was not a single event. It was a family of tornadoes that formed along the same cold front. The Suffolk tornado was the strongest. The others were brief and weak, but they show that the atmosphere was unstable enough to produce multiple circulations. The investigation into the warning system did not stop with the radar. The emergency management officials also looked at the communication chain. The warning that was issued at 3:28 p.m. went out over NOAA weather radio, local television stations, and the emergency alert system. But the city of Suffolk did not have a direct link to the National Weather Service. The warning was relayed through the State Emergency Operations Center. That added a delay of about 2 minutes. The city did not receive the warning until 3:30 p.m. By then, the tornado was already visible on the ground. The city's emergency manager activated the siren system at 3:31 p.m. The sirens sounded for 3 minutes. They were still sounding when the tornado hit the western edge of the city. The question of public response cannot be separated from the technical failures. The residents who heard the sirens did not necessarily know what they meant. A survey conducted by the city after the event found that 30% of residents did not know that a steady siren tone meant tornado warning. They thought it was a weekly test. Some thought it was a fire siren. The city had not conducted a public education campaign about the siren system in more than 10 years. The system had been installed in the 1970s and was used primarily as a fire dispatch siren. The tones were different, but the distinction was not widely known. The population of Suffolk in 2008 was about 80,000 people. It was a growing city with many new residents who had moved from other parts of the country. Some of those residents had never experienced a tornado. Others had experienced tornadoes in the plains and believed that Virginia did not get real tornadoes. That belief was reinforced by the fact that the last significant tornado in Suffolk had occurred in 1967. That tornado was in Phone. It damaged a few homes and barns. No one had been killed. The memory of that event had faded. The community had a false sense of security. The human consequences of the tornado were tragic but could have been much worse. The final death toll was 1. That one death was a woman named Martina Williams. She was 42 years old. She lived in a mobile home park on the north side of the city. The park was called Forest Hills. Mobile homes are especially vulnerable to tornadoes. They are not attached to a foundation. They can be overturned or destroyed by winds as low as 70 miles per hour. The tornado that struck Forest Hills was estimated to have winds of 120 miles per hour. That is enough to destroy a mobile home completely. Martina Williams was at home that afternoon. She had taken the day off from her job at a local restaurant. She was watching television when the weather report interrupted the programming. The warning said that a tornado was possible. She called her mother, who lived in the same park. Her mother said she was going to take shelter in the bathroom. Martina said she was going to stay on the couch and watch the storm. Her mother pleaded with her. Martina did not move. A few minutes later, the tornado struck the park. The mobile home was lifted off its blocks and rolled. Martina was thrown from the structure. She suffered severe head trauma. She died at the scene. Her mother survived because she was in the bathtub with a mattress over her. The death of Martina Williams became a focus of the after-action review. The question was asked, could she have been saved? The answer was complicated. The warning was issued. The siren sounded. She had family who urged her to take shelter, but she did not believe the threat was real. This is a common response to low-probability, high-consequence events. The human brain does not easily process a threat that it has never encountered before. Martina Williams had lived in Suffolk for 20 years. She had never seen a tornado. She did not think it would happen to her. The storm also had a profound impact on the first responders. The police and fire departments that day were overwhelmed. The city's fire chief later said that the scene was unlike anything he had seen in his career. The debris was everywhere. The streets were impassable. The communication system was down. The responders had to use their personal cell phones to coordinate. Some of them had to walk through neighborhoods because the roads were blocked. They went door to door looking for victims. They found people who were trapped under collapsed walls. They found people who were walking in shock. They found animals wandering in the streets. The search and rescue operations continued until late that night. The next day, the focus shifted to recovery. The American Red Cross set up a service center at the Suffolk City Hall. People came to apply for assistance. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, was not activated because the damage did not meet the threshold for a federal disaster declaration. That meant that the recovery effort was largely local and state-funded. The state of Virginia provided grants to the city and to individual homeowners, but the grants were limited. Some families had to rely on private insurance. Others had no insurance and had to rely on donations. The long-term recovery took years. The Lake Cahoon neighborhood was rebuilt with stronger building codes. The city adopted a requirement for tornado clips on all new residential construction. The school gymnasium was rebuilt with a concrete roof. The church steeple was replaced with a replica. The historic district was restored with the help of preservation grants. The city also built a new emergency operations center with a backup generator and a satellite communication system. The old water tower that had been destroyed was replaced with a new one. But the tower that was destroyed had been a local landmark. It had the city's name on it. The new tower did not have the name. Some residents felt that something had been lost. The meteorological lessons from the Suffolk tornado were shared with the national weather community. The radar algorithms were improved to better detect weak rotation at low levels. The National Weather Service implemented a new practice of issuing tornado warnings based on the threat, not just on confirmed rotation. They called it a damage threat tag. They also improved the integration of spotter reports into the warning process. The spotter who reported the funnel cloud at 3:16 p.m. was a trained volunteer. His report was received by the Wakefield office, but it was not given high priority because the storm was not in a warning polygon. After 2008, the policy was changed so that any report of a funnel cloud or tornado would be immediately evaluated and could trigger a warning. The social science research that followed the tornado has been cited in emergency management textbooks. The concept of the normalcy bias was studied in detail. Researchers found that the longer the lead time, the more likely people are to delay taking action. They also found that repeated false alarms can cause people to ignore warnings. Suffolk had experienced several tornado warnings in the years before 2008, but none of them had produced a tornado. The result was that people became complacent. The solution that many communities adopted was to combine the warning with a specific call to action. Instead of saying tornado warning, the message would say take shelter now. The Suffolk tornado also highlighted the need for community-based preparedness. In the years after the event, the city of Suffolk conducted regular tabletop exercises with the National Weather Service. They also created a network of storm spotters. They trained citizens to recognize the signs of an approaching tornado. They encouraged people to have a plan. They also worked with the local media to ensure that warnings were broadcast accurately and prominently. The event changed the way that tornadoes were perceived in Virginia. Before 2008, the state was considered to be in a low-risk zone. Afterward, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management updated its hazard assessment. Tornadoes were elevated to a higher priority. The state began providing grants for safe rooms in schools and public buildings. The state also expanded its Siren Grant program to help rural counties install warning systems. The Suffolk tornado remains a case study in weather forecasting, emergency management, and public behavior. It shows that a tornado does not need to be an EF5 to be destructive. It shows that even a 20-minute warning can be ineffective if the population does not believe the threat is real. It shows that the worst disasters are not always the ones that are expected. The final death toll of one could have been many more. The damage total of over $100 million was a heavy blow to a small city, but the city recovered. The people rebuilt. The lessons were learned. The question that remains is whether those lessons have been applied elsewhere. In the years since 2008, tornadoes have struck other parts of the mid-Atlantic. The most notable was the 2011 tornado outbreak that killed 8 people in North Carolina. That outbreak also featured low-top storms and weak radar signatures. The same problems that appeared in Suffolk reappeared there. The Suffolk tornado was not a rare event. It was a textbook example of a high-end EF3 tornado in a region that does not get many tornadoes. The conditions that produced it are present every spring and summer along the East Coast. The question is not whether another tornado like this will happen. It is when, and whether the next community will be ready. The answer to that question began to take shape in a small town in North Carolina, 3 years after the Suffolk tornado. On the afternoon of April 16, 2011, a line of severe thunderstorms moved across the state. The National Weather Service office in Raleigh issued a tornado warning for Johnston County at 3:41 p.m. The warning was based on radar-indicated rotation, but the storm had a history of producing weak, brief tornadoes. At 3:47 p.m., a tornado touched down near the town of Four Oaks. It was an EF3 with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. It stayed on the ground for nearly 20 miles. It destroyed dozens of homes and killed 3 people. The warning lead time was 18 minutes, yet many residents did not take shelter. They later told reporters that they did not believe a tornado could hit their area. The normalcy bias was in full effect. The parallels to Suffolk were unmistakable. The same radar signatures, the same public skepticism, the same disconnect between the warning and the response. In the aftermath, the National Weather Service conducted a service assessment. They found that the warning was technically accurate and timely, but the public's perception of risk was low because tornadoes were rare in that part of North Carolina. The assessment recommended that local emergency managers work with the media to produce more compelling warning messages. It also recommended that the NWS adopt a new system for categorizing tornado threats that would include explicit language about the expected intensity and time of arrival. That system would later become the impact-based warning format, which was rolled out nationally in 2020. But the changes did not stop at the federal level. In Virginia, the 2008 Suffolk tornado had already set in motion a series of local initiatives that would reshape how communities prepared for tornadoes. One of those communities was the city of Chesapeake, which borders Suffolk and had experienced the outer edge of the same storm. In 2009, the Chesapeake Fire Department began a program to install weather radios in every public school. They also trained school staff to conduct immediate, no-delay tornado drills as soon as a warning was issued. The program was funded by a state grant that had been expanded after the Suffolk tornado. By 2010, the city had weather radios in all 44 of its elementary schools. The principal of one school later said that the radios gave them a level of confidence they had never had before. Meanwhile, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management began a study of the siren system in Suffolk. The study found that the sirens were effective in open areas but could not be heard inside homes with modern insulation and air conditioning. This was a significant problem, especially in the summer when windows were closed. The study recommended that the city switch to a layered warning system that included text alerts, reverse 911 calls, and digital signage. Suffolk implemented this layered approach in 2010, using the same grant money that had been used for the building code upgrades. The city also began requiring mobile home parks to install their own warning sirens and to conduct annual drills. The mobile home parks had been a focal point of the after-action review. The Lake Calhoun Mobile Home Park was heavily damaged, but the park had no central warning system. The residents relied on the city sirens and the television broadcasts. The study found that many residents did not have televisions on during the afternoon, and the sirens could not be heard over the noise of air conditioners or fans. The recommendation was to require each park to have a dedicated siren that could be triggered by the city's Emergency Operations Center. By 2012, all 32 mobile home parks in Suffolk had installed these sirens. The cost was covered by a combination of state grants and park owner fees. But the most profound change came in the way the National Weather Service in Wakefield handled tornado warnings for the region. After the Suffolk tornado, the office's meteorologists began working closely with the local media to develop a system of tornado warning confirmations. When a warning was issued, a designated spotter or emergency manager would be called to verify the funnel cloud or tornado on the ground. This confirmation would then be broadcast immediately by the media, giving the public a reason to take the warning seriously. The system was tested during the 2011 outbreak and it worked. In one case, a spotter confirmed a tornado in Isle of Wight County within 3 minutes of the warning being issued. The local television station broke into programming with a live report and residents took shelter. No one was killed. The human consequences of the Suffolk tornado extended well beyond the physical damage. The death of Martina Williams was the only fatality, but dozens of people were injured. One of them was a man named Robert Hanson who lived in the Manchester neighborhood. He was in his garage when the tornado struck. The garage collapsed on top of him, crushing his legs. He was trapped for 2 hours before rescue crews could dig him out. He underwent multiple surgeries and spent 6 months in rehabilitation. He never fully recovered. He developed chronic pain and depression. He lost his job at a shipping company because he could no longer stand for long periods. His wife divorced him the following year. He told a reporter in 2010 that the tornado took everything from him, not just his home but his life. The psychological toll on the first responders was also significant. The Suffolk Fire Department provided counseling services for its personnel after the event. Several firefighters reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. They had difficulty sleeping, they experienced flashbacks of the debris field, they felt anxious when storms approached. The city's fire chief implemented a peer support program in 2009, which trained firefighters to recognize signs of stress in one another. The program was later adopted by other fire departments in the region. The chief said that the biggest lesson was that mental health care had to be a permanent part of emergency response, not just an afterthought. The meteorological investigation of the Suffolk tornado continued for several years. The National Weather Service's radar data was reanalyzed using new algorithms that were developed after the event. The reanalysis showed that the storm had produced a distinct signature of vortex stretching and vertical acceleration that was not captured by the original algorithms. The signature was present at 3:12 p.m., 4 minutes before the spotter report. If the radar had been programmed to detect that signature, a warning could have been issued at 3:12, giving residents an additional 4 minutes to take shelter. The NWS used this finding to update the radar software across the country. That software became the basis for the dual polarization upgrade that was completed in 2003. The dual-pol radar was a major technological leap. It allowed meteorologists to see not just the intensity of a storm but the size and shape of particles inside it. This helped them distinguish between hail, rain, and debris. The ability to detect debris on the radar became a critical tool for identifying tornadoes that were not visible to spotters. In 2013, the NWS issued its first-ever tornado warning based solely on a debris signature. The warning was for a storm in Oklahoma, and it saved lives. But the lessons from Suffolk were not only about technology, they were about human behavior. The normalcy bias that had caused Martina Williams to stay on her couch was studied by social scientists at the University of Virginia. They conducted interviews with survivors of the tornado and with residents of the Lake Calhoun neighborhood. They found that the primary reason people did not take shelter was that they had never experienced a tornado before. They also found that the sound of the siren was not enough to overcome that bias. The siren was interpreted as a generic warning, not a specific threat. The solution was to pair the siren with a specific message that told people exactly what to do and where to go. The city of Suffolk began using this approach in its emergency alerts. The alerts now include the name of the threat tornado, the direction it is moving, and a direct instruction: take shelter immediately. The economic impact of the Suffolk tornado was also studied. The total damage was estimated at $108 million. That was a significant sum for a city with a population of 80,000. The insurance claims were handled by multiple companies and there were disputes over coverage. Some homeowners had policies that excluded wind damage caused by tornadoes, classifying it instead as flood damage. The state of Virginia changed its insurance regulations in 2010 to require that all homeowner policies cover wind damage from tornadoes, regardless of the type of storm. This was a direct result of the Suffolk tornado. The rebuilding process took 5 years. The Lake Calhoun neighborhood was fully reconstructed by 2003. The new homes were built to stricter codes, with hurricane straps, impact-resistant windows, and reinforced garage doors. The streets were widened to allow emergency vehicles to pass. The water and sewer lines were buried deeper to prevent them from being torn up by future storms. The city planted new trees, but they chose species that were less likely to uproot in high winds. The neighborhood looked different. The old trees that had provided shade for decades were gone. The new trees were small. Some residents said the neighborhood felt bare. The church at 227 North Main Street was rebuilt and reopened in 2010. The congregation had held services in a temporary building for 2 years. The new church had a steel frame and a concrete sanctuary. The steeple was a replica of the original, but it was built to withstand winds of 160 miles per hour. The old steeple had been made of wood and had no reinforcement. The new one was attached with bolts that ran through the roof and into the concrete pillars. The water tower received the most attention. The old tower had been a landmark with the word Suffolk painted in large letters. It was a symbol of the city. When it fell, many residents felt a sense of loss. The city council debated whether to rebuild it exactly as it was or to build a new design. They eventually decided to rebuild a similar tower, but without the name. They argued that the name was not necessary and that the tower was simply a utility. Some residents protested, but the city proceeded. The new tower was completed in 2010. It stands 150 feet tall, the same as the old one. It is made of galvanized steel. It does not have the word Suffolk on it. The school gymnasium at the site where Martina Williams's body was found was rebuilt with a reinforced concrete roof. The new gym was also used as a community shelter during severe weather. The school conducted tornado drills every month. The students were taught to crouch with their heads down and their hands over their ears. The drills were serious and silent. The school's principal said that the children knew exactly what to do. They had been told about the tornado of 2008. The city of Suffolk did not just rebuild buildings. It rebuilt its emergency management structure. The new Emergency Operations Center was equipped with redundant communication systems, satellite phones, and a backup generator that could run for 72 hours without refueling. The center had a dedicated weather monitoring station that could display radar data from the NWS in real time. The staff were trained to issue warnings directly to cell phones using the wireless emergency alert system, which had been launched in 2010. The city also created a position for a full-time emergency manager. Before 2008, the job had been part-time and filled by a fire department captain. After 2008, it became a full-time civilian position with a budget. The Virginia Department of Emergency Management used the Suffolk tornado as a template for its statewide tornado preparedness plan. The plan was published in 2011 and included a chapter on public education. It recommended that local governments conduct annual tornado drills, distribute information about safe rooms, and partner with schools and businesses to develop shelter plans. It also recommended that the state fund a program to install safe rooms in mobile home parks. That program was launched in 2012 and had installed safe rooms in 30 parks by 2015. The success of the Suffolk response and recovery was not without criticism. Some residents felt that the city had been too slow to restore power. Some felt that the debris cleanup had been mismanaged. Some felt that the city had not done enough to help the uninsured families. The city council held public hearings where residents expressed their frustrations. One woman whose house was destroyed told the council that she had to wait 6 months for a FEMA grant that never came. She eventually moved out of Suffolk. The council responded by creating a relief fund that was managed by the United Way. The fund raised $100,000 and distributed it to families who did not qualify for other assistance. The tornado also had a lasting effect on the local economy. Several small businesses never reopened. The owner of a hardware store on North Main Street said that the storm had destroyed his inventory and his records. He had no insurance. He closed the store and moved to Richmond. The storefront remained empty for 3 years before a new business opened. It was a coffee shop. The owner of the coffee shop said that he had chosen the location because he wanted to be part of the city's rebirth. The rebirth was slow but steady. By 2015, the city had fully recovered. The population had grown, the housing market had stabilized, the city's credit rating had been restored. The new Emergency Operations Center was considered one of the best in the state. The city had become a model for tornado preparedness in the mid-Atlantic, but the memory of the storm remained. On the anniversary of the tornado, the city held a brief ceremony at the site of the Lake Calhoun Mobile Home Park. A small plaque was installed in a park that had been built where the mobile homes once stood. The plaque listed the name of Martina Williams and the date of the storm. It also included a sentence: "This community was destroyed by an EF3 tornado on April 28, 2008. It was rebuilt with the help of neighbors, friends, and the city of Suffolk." The story of the Suffolk tornado did not end with the rebuilding. It became a part of the national conversation about tornadoes in the United States. The National Weather Service incorporated the lessons into its training programs. The American Meteorological Society published a paper on the event, citing it as an example of how radar technology, public messaging, and community preparedness must work together. The paper was titled "The Suffolk Tornado of 2008, a case study in forecast and response." The question that had been asked after the storm was whether the next community would be ready. By 2015, the answer was mixed. Some communities had adopted the recommendations, others had not. The city of Suffolk was ready, the city of Chesapeake was ready, but there were hundreds of other towns and cities in the mid-Atlantic that still relied on old sirens, old building codes, and old assumptions about tornadoes. The threat had not diminished. The conditions that produced the Suffolk tornado still exist. The Chesapeake Bay region still experiences low-topped storms with weak radar signatures. The normalcy bias still persists. In the years that followed, other tornadoes struck the region. In 2016, an EF2 tornado hit the town of Tappahannock, Virginia. The warning lead time was 14 minutes. No one was killed. In 2018, an E-phone tornado struck the city of Williamsburg. The warning lead time was 10 minutes. No one was killed. In 2020, an EF3 tornado hit the city of Newport News, just 30 miles from Suffolk. The warning lead time was 17 minutes. 2 people were killed. The deaths occurred in a mobile home park. The residents had not taken shelter. The sirens had sounded. The warnings had been issued. But the normalcy bias had won again. The Suffolk tornado of 2008 was not the deadliest tornado in Virginia history. That distinction belongs to the 1993 tornado that killed 4 people in the town of Petersburg. But the Suffolk tornado was the most studied. It was the tornado that changed the way the National Weather Service thought about radar, about warnings, and about public behavior. It was the tornado that forced a small city to rebuild itself from the ground up, not just physically but emotionally. The people of Suffolk still remember the storm. They remember the sound of the wind. They remember the sight of the sky turning green. They remember the smell of the mud and the wood and the insulation. They remember the moment when they realized that their world had been turned upside down. And they remember the recovery. They remember the days when they worked side by side with their neighbors, clearing debris, sharing food, and offering comfort. They remember the volunteers who came from other cities to help. They remember the churches that opened their doors. They remember the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves. That feeling is what the tornado left behind. Not just the damage, not just the fear, but the knowledge that a community can be broken and then made whole again. The knowledge that even a 20-minute warning can be enough if the people who hear it are ready. The knowledge that preparedness is not just about sirens and radios and shelters. It is about trust. It is about believing that the threat is real. It is about taking action before it is too late. The Suffolk tornado of April 28, 2008 was a low-topped supercell that produced a high-end EF3 tornado in a place where such storms were not supposed to happen. It was a warning to the entire mid-Atlantic region. It was a reminder that tornadoes do not care about geography. They do not care about history. They do not care about what people believe. They only care about the conditions that allow them to form, and those conditions will come again. The question is not whether the next community will be ready. The question is whether the lessons of Suffolk will be remembered long enough to make a difference. The plaque at Lake Calhoun Mobile Home Park is small. It is easy to overlook, but it is still there, and the story of Martina Williams is still told. It is told in the training courses for new meteorologists. It is told in the emergency management workshops. It is told in the classrooms of Suffolk schools. It is told on the anniversary of the storm when the city pauses to remember. And every time the story is told, another person learns that a tornado warning is not a suggestion. It is an instruction, and the only correct response is to take shelter. That is the legacy of the Suffolk tornado. That is the lesson that the storm left behind. That is the answer to the question of whether the next community will be ready. The answer is yes if they pay attention, and the answer is no if they forget.